Hey guys, so this is it. I think this is the last packet that we're doing for our remote learning. It's Friday. You got a few more days left. Our last school day is Wednesday, June 10th. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. This is Mutation episode 5. So it's right there. Mutation episode 5. This is called, let me see here. This is called A Big Mistake. Episode 5, A Big Mistake. So, trying to move this. There we go. All right, I had to move the screen. All right, episode 5, A Big Mistake. In episode 4, the white mouse in the lab revealed to Emmy that she was Professor Katrina Bickers. But Dr. Z did not know this and hit her with his broom. Quickly, using the cell phone, I tapped out a message explaining who the mouse Dr. Z had squashed under his lucky broom really was, hoping I wasn't too late. Then I scampered to TJ and waved my paws frantically to get his attention. When TJ read the message, his face turned pale, and he shouted to Dr. Z, "Wait! The mouse is Professor Bickers!" Dr. Z instantly pulled the broom away and hurled it across the room, exclaiming, "Could it really be Professor Bickers? This is utterly, absolutely astounding!" But Professor Bickers already looked like a lifeless pile of fur. Professor Bickers didn't twitch or move a muscle. Standing on the tabletop helplessly, I held my breath as Dr. Z kneeled on the floor, picked up Professor Bickers, and somberly placed her limp body onto the table next to me. I held her paw and squeaked softly, "Professor, can you hear me?" "Please be okay," TJ begged. After a long, agonizing moment, the professor's back legs twitched, and a few seconds later, her eyes fluttered open. The professor gazed at me for a minute, shivering as she said with a weak squeak, "I'm sorry I bit you, but I was frightened and needed help because I've been mutated like this for weeks." "Oh, Professor Bickers," said Dr. Z, who of course couldn't understand the professor's squeaks. "First I lost the M2, and then I almost flattened the best lab partner I've ever known. Can you ever forgive a befuddled old scientist like me?" Sitting up and blinking her eyes a few times, Professor Bickers squeaked, "You didn't lose the M2. I know where it is, and I've desperately been trying to find you and tell you for weeks. Where have you been?" I tapped out the professor's message on the phone as quickly as I could. "Why? You mean you didn't quit?" "Of course not. A scientist never quits." I continued tapping out the professor's messages, trying to keep up with her words. "Then what did happen, and where is the M2? TJ asked. This time, Professor Bickers tapped the answer out herself. The M2 rolled off the table, into the vent, and down a shaft while we were working on the experiment. But I'm sure I can reach it if someone lowers me. "Your condition is critical, and you are in no shape to be lowered down into vents," Dr. Z said, shaking his head. "He's right. I'll do it," I squeaked, before tapping out the message on the phone. "No, Emmy, what if you get hurt?" I tapped. "I will be careful, and I have to do it, because I'm not going back to school looking like this in the fall." "I have a shoelace from my running shoes we can use, if you think it will be long enough," Dr. Z offered. The professor wrote, "Yes, I'm sure it will be, but we must hurry, because I think rain is flooding the shaft." As Dr. Z retrieved the shoelace and tied it around my middle, I felt my heart thumping against my ribcage. I pulled at the shoelace to make sure it was snug around me, and then I pressed my body through a metal slot in the vent on the floor. Meanwhile, Professor Bickers stood outside the vent, watching apprehensively. Slowly, Dr. Z let out the shoelace and lowered me down into the shaft, where everything went fine, until a creepy brown beetle skittered out of a crack into the shaft. "Ah, get away!" I kicked my legs at it, and the beetle disappeared, but then I felt the shoelace give way, and oh no! The knot around my middle was coming undone. "Emmy, what's happening?" shouted Dr. Z. "I'm falling!" I squeaked. Splash! Water rushed in all around me, and I could hardly catch my breath. "The shaft!" I squeaked in between gasps for air. "It's all flooded!" Well, that's the end of part 5. I don't know that we're going to finish that story. The district hasn't given me the rest. But here are your questions. Question 1. Which of these should not be included in a summary of this episode? A. Professor Bickers says Emmy has to hurry because the shaft is flooding. B. Professor Bickers explains that the M2 rolled off the table and into the vent. C. Dr. Z ties a shoelace around Emmy and lowers her down into the shaft. D. Dr. Z asks Professor Bickers to forgive a befuddled old scientist like him. Question 2. Why does Emmy volunteer to go and get the M2? A. Emmy volunteers so Professor Bickers can explain everything to TJ. B. Emmy volunteers because Professor Bickers is in no shape to go. C. Emmy volunteers because Professor Bickers is too scared to go. D. Emmy volunteers so Professor Bickers can help Dr. Z calm down. Question 3. Read this sentence from the episode. Standing on the tabletop helplessly, I held my breath as Dr. Z kneeled on the floor, picked up Professor Bickers, and somberly placed her limp body on the table next to me. What is the closest antonym, the opposite word, for the word somberly? A. Reluctantly. B. Cheerfully. C. Warily. D. Gently. Last question, question 4. What is the problem at the end of this episode? A. Professor Bickers gets scared and tells TJ to rescue Emmy from the shaft. B. Emmy sees a creepy beetle in the shaft and she is too scared to keep going. C. Emmy feels the shoelace give way and she falls into the flooded shaft. D. Professor Bickers decides to help out Emmy and gets stuck in the vent. All right, everyone, that's it. Go back into Schoology, take that quiz, and then you're done. All right? Let's have a good one, and I hope to see you next year. Bye-bye.